Hello and welcome. Deep beneath the Mror Holds, where the mountain roots dig into bedrock older than memory, miners of Clan Mror broke through into a chamber that should not exist. The air that rushed out carried a scent of ancient dust and something else, something that made Dwarven senses recoil. Within that darkness, carved walls bore the mark of master stonemasons, but the symbols were wrong, twisted, as if the very stone had learned to scream. This was not just another forgotten tunnel. This was Sol Udar, the realm below, the ancestral homeland of the Dwarven people, lost thousands of years ago. And you are about to discover why some doors should remain sealed forever. You stand now at the threshold of understanding, ready to descend into a history that the Dwarven kingdoms tried desperately to forget. Sol Udar represents both the greatest heights of Dwarven achievement and the most catastrophic fall from grace. When you hear the name whispered in the taverns of the Mror Holds, you see old dwarves touch their clan's symbols and turn away. They know the stories passed down through generations. They know what was lost, and more importantly, they know what was found again, writhing in the depths, waiting for foolish explorers to venture too deep. The realm below, as the ancient dwarves called their underground kingdom, once stood as a marvel of civilization beneath what would become the Ironroot Mountains of Corvair. The exact founding date remains lost to history, but scholars agree it predates the Daelker invasion by at least several thousand years, making Sol Udar over 9,000 years old. You must understand the scale of what was achieved here. This was not merely a city. Sol Udar was a vast subterranean realm that stretched for untold miles through the living rock, with chambers carved by magic far more advanced than anything the modern Five Nations possess. Based on the extent of the ruins discovered so far, some scholars estimate the population could have numbered in the tens of thousands, though the true scale remains unknown. The origins of the dwarves who built Sol Udar remain shrouded in mystery and legend. Some tales speak of the Dwarven people fleeing a frozen realm, possibly Rizha itself, delving ever deeper into stone to escape the cold. Other stories suggest they came from elsewhere entirely, migrating to Corvair in ancient times. What we can confirm is that they carved a magnificent civilization beneath the Ironroot Mountains, creating a society that would endure for millennia. The dwarves who founded Sol Udar brought with them advanced magical knowledge, understanding of planar mechanics, and architectural techniques that have yet to be fully recovered by modern scholars. But you need to grasp what made Sol Udar truly special among subterranean civilizations. The realm below was built upon what the dwarves would later recognize as manifest zones, places where the barriers between the material world and other planes of existence grew thin. Evidence suggests these connections touched multiple realms. There were ties to Fernia, the Sea of Fire, which empowered the legendary forges. Connections to other planes brought both benefits and ultimately catastrophe. Most fatefully, there were weak points in reality that touched Zoriat, the realm of madness. The ancient dwarves harnessed these planar connections, using them to fuel their forges, power their magic, and create wonders. They knew the manifest zones made certain workings easier, that their smiths could achieve temperatures impossible elsewhere. But the full implications of these connections would not become clear until it was far too late. You would have witnessed a civilization that integrated magic into every aspect of daily life. The chronicles recovered from Sol Udar describe halls shaped by elemental magic, an improved form of spells that could move earth, reinforced to be stronger than any natural stone. The dwarves created permanent magical effects throughout their realm. Magical lighting illuminated the passages, never requiring fuel or maintenance. Climate control maintained comfortable temperatures even in the deepest chambers. Prestidigitation effects kept the halls clean, so that even after thousands of years of abandonment, some areas remain remarkably preserved. This was a highly magical civilization employing arcane science beyond that currently possessed by the Five Nations. A society where cantrip effects were woven into the very architecture. The organization of Sol Udar centered around clan structure, with multiple dwarven clans working together to build and maintain their underground realm. The exact number and names of all clans remain subjects of scholarly debate, though we know that 13 clans eventually suffered exile to the surface world, based on what modern Mror dwarves remember through oral tradition and what has been recovered from the ruins. We can infer that clans likely specialized in different aspects of society. Some would have focused on stonework and mining, reading ore veins, and knowing where to dig. Others mastered the forge, creating weapons and items of legendary power. Merchant clans would have managed trade networks. Warrior clans protected the realm from the dangers that lurked in the deep places of the world. The architecture discovered in Sol Udar reveals a philosophy that blended natural beauty with magical precision. You would have walked through passages carved with incredible skill, where every surface bore decorative elements that also served structural purposes. The dwarves did not simply hollow out the mountain. They worked with the existing geology, preserving and enhancing natural formations. Massive geode chambers were incorporated into public spaces, their crystalline surfaces left intact as centerpieces of grand halls. Stalactite formations were carved into hanging gardens, with channels that allowed water to cascade from level to level. This suggests a culture that valued beauty alongside function, that took pride in craftsmanship for its own sake. The forges of Sol Udar earned their legendary status through a combination of natural advantages and accumulated expertise. The connection to Furnia, the Sea of Fire, provided elemental flame that burned hotter than any mundane fire. Smiths could work with exotic metals and create alloys impossible to forge elsewhere. The artificers of Sol Udar, working alongside master smiths, developed techniques for creating permanent magical items that incorporated enchantments at the molecular level. These methods have been partially recovered from surviving texts, but much remains lost. The weapons and armor that surface occasionally from the ruins demonstrate capabilities that modern artificers struggle to replicate. Items that have remained sharp and functional after thousands of years, buried in corrupted stone. The governance structure of Sol Udar, based on fragmentary evidence from recovered documents, appears to have centered on a council system where clan leaders shared power. This could explain both the strength of their civilization, drawing on the expertise and resources of multiple clans, and its eventual fracturing. At some point in Sol Udar's history, a crisis occurred, whether it was a succession dispute, a matter of justice gone wrong, or a fundamental disagreement about the realm's direction. 13 clans were exiled to the surface world. This exile created the mountain dwarves, who would eventually form the Mror Holds, while those who remained below continued their civilization in the depths. You need to understand that the dwarves who remained in Sol Udar after the exile believed their realm would endure forever. They had survived for untold generations already. Their magical infrastructure seemed eternal, maintained by spells that required no conscious effort. Their forges had never cooled. Their great works of architecture had withstood the test of time. This confidence in permanence pervaded their culture. They carved their achievements, expecting descendants 10,000 years hence to marvel at them. They built institutions designed to function across countless generations. The idea that their entire civilization could fall seemed impossible to conceive. The signs of coming disaster appeared gradually, so subtly that few recognized them for what they were. You would have heard stories passed down through the generations and recorded in the few salvaged chronicles of miners finding strange formations in newly opened passages, stone that seemed to pulse with inner light, caverns where the laws of physics seemed negotiable, where up and down became confused. Scouts mentioned distant sounds that defied explanation, metallic screaming, or whispers in languages that hurt to hear. The leadership of Sol Udar, from what we can piece together, treated these reports as curiosities. They were scholars and craftspeople, naturally inclined toward investigation rather than fear. They studied these phenomena, documented them, discussed them in council meetings. They failed to recognize that the manifest zones they had benefited from for so long were changing, growing stronger, reaching towards something beyond the material world. The change reached a critical point approximately 9,000 years ago, during what Dwarven historians now call the Age of the Daelker invasion. You would have witnessed reality itself beginning to fracture. Zoriat, the realm of madness, became coterminous with Eberron, meaning the plane drew close enough that the barriers between worlds wore thin as paper. A Across western Corvair, Daelker lords and their armies of aberrations poured through planar portals, determined to reshape Eberron into a nightmare extension of their native realm. The great Dakani Empire to the west faced the main thrust of this invasion and would be broken by it. But Sol Udar, built upon manifest zones that connected to Zoriat, became another prime target for these entities of madness. Section 2. The Golden Age of Sol Udar. The Golden Age of Sol Udar stretched across millennia, an era of prosperity and achievement that has never been equaled in Dwarven history. You would have witnessed a civilization at its peak, though we must reconstruct this picture from fragments, from artifacts recovered in modern expeditions, from oral traditions passed down through generations of surface dwarves, and from the few precious texts that survived the fall. The dwarves who built and maintained the realm below created something remarkable, a society that integrated magic and craft so seamlessly that distinguishing between the two became impossible. Each generation built upon the foundations laid by their ancestors, and the accumulated knowledge of millennia transformed Sol Udar into something beyond what its founders could have imagined. The architecture of Sol Udar reflected a unique aesthetic that modern explorers struggle to fully comprehend. You would have noticed immediately that the dwarves did not simply carve chambers from solid rock through brute force, based on the ruins that remain accessible. Scholars believe they worked with powerful elemental magic, possibly binding earth elementals or employing enhanced versions of stone-shaping spells. The passages and halls show signs of magical manipulation at a fundamental level, with stone that has been softened, shaped, and then re-hardened into forms stronger than natural rock. When they discovered massive natural formations, crystal geodes, or stalactite clusters, they preserved them as centerpieces of public spaces, building around rather than destroying these geological wonders. This philosophy of working with stone rather than against it created spaces that felt organic despite being artificial, chambers that seemed to have grown naturally rather than being carved by hand. The residential districts discovered in the upper levels of Sol Udar demonstrate how Dwarven practicality merged with artistic expression. You would have lived in a dwelling carved directly into the cavern wall, with an entrance marked by an elaborately decorated facade based on recovered examples. Each family commissioned these carvings to reflect their clan affiliation, occupation, and personal history. A smith family might have their doorway flanked by crossed hammers and anvils, with scenes of legendary forges depicted in relief panels. A merchant family would display scales and coins, perhaps with a frieze showing caravans laden with goods. The interiors continued this artistry, with every room featuring carved details. These residential areas, where they remain uncorrupted, provide our clearest window into daily life in ancient Sol Udar. The forge districts earned their reputation through a combination of natural advantages and accumulated expertise spanning generations. You would have felt the heat radiating from these chambers, and modern explorers who have reached intact forge areas report that some still emanate warmth despite millennia of abandonment. This suggests permanent connections to Furnia, the sea of fire that continue to function even now. The manifest zone connection provided elemental fire that required no fuel and never diminished, allowing smiths to achieve temperatures impossible with mundane forges. The techniques they developed went far beyond simple metalworking. Recovered technical manuals, though fragmentary, describe processes where magical enchantment was integrated during the forging process itself, not added afterward as modern artificers typically work. The legendary weapons and armor produced in Sol Udar during this golden age still surface occasionally in modern times. You might hold a sword forged thousands of years ago and find it sharper than anything made yesterday, its edge still keen despite the passage of millennia. These items carried names and histories, and the greatest pieces show signs of semi-sentient properties. This could imply that the artificers of Sol Udar understood techniques for binding fragments of consciousness or elemental awareness into their creations, methods that remain largely mysterious to modern scholars. Armor recovered from the ruins sometimes repairs minor damage on its own, slowly knitting broken rings back together through processes that suggest ongoing magical effects far more sophisticated than simple mending spells. The merchant class of Sol Udar, based on what we can infer from recovered ledgers and trade records, built an economic network that stretched beyond the realm below. You would have worked with trade representatives from the surface world, exchanging Dwarven metalwork and magical items for food, timber, and raw materials not available underground. The merchants established the trade routes and relationships that would eventually allow the 13 exiled clans to survive when they were forced to the surface. The records that survive show a culture of absolute reliability, where contracts were treated as sacred obligations. A deal made in Sol Udar carried the weight of clan honor behind it, and merchants who failed to deliver faced not just personal shame, but brought dishonor upon their entire family line. The banking and financial systems developed in Sol Udar appear to have laid groundwork for practices still used by House Kundarak today. You would have deposited wealth in secure vaults, and the fragmentary records recovered suggest these vaults employed both physical and magical security measures of remarkable sophistication based on economic documents found in the ruins. The Dwarves of Sol Udar invented concepts that would not resurface in human kingdoms for thousands of years, promissory notes that could be traded as currency, risk assessment formulas for loans, even early forms of insurance against trade caravan losses. The modern banking practices of House Kundarak likely represent recovered knowledge from Sol Udar rather than new innovations. techniques rediscovered rather than invented. The magical research conducted in Sol Udar pushed boundaries in ways that modern Corvair struggles to match. You would have studied in dedicated arcane districts, where wizards and artificers worked together, combining theoretical knowledge with practical application. The texts recovered from Sol Udar describe experiments with manifest zones, careful studies of how planar connections could be harnessed and directed. They developed new enchantment schemas, patterns of magical energy that could be permanently bound into objects. Most significantly, they appear to have achieved deep understanding of how to use dragon shards, the crystalline formations that serve as focuses for magical power. Modern artificers use dragon shards, but the techniques described in recovered Sol Udar texts suggest capabilities beyond current practice. The educational institutions of Sol Udar, based on what we can reconstruct from surviving records and architectural evidence, represented something remarkable in their integration of theory and practice. You would have attended schools that covered everything from basic literacy and mathematics to advanced topics like planar mechanics and arcane theory. But education in Sol Udar never remained purely theoretical. Even the most scholarly subjects included practical components, with students expected to demonstrate mastery through actual creation rather than just understanding concepts. This integration of theoretical knowledge with hands-on skill created a population where even scholars possessed practical abilities, where craftspeople understood the underlying principles of their work rather than just following rote procedures. The medical knowledge accumulated in Sol Udar combined practical surgery with magical healing in ways that suggest advanced understanding of both. You would have visited healing halls where practitioners treated injuries common to mining and smithing work. The anatomical knowledge required to treat complex fractures or internal injuries implies either extensive study of Dwarven physiology or magical methods of diagnosis that allowed healers to see inside the body. The integration of divine magic from clerics of the sovereign host with secular medical practice created a comprehensive approach to healing. Some recovered texts describe techniques where magical healing was used to stabilize patients, while mundane surgery addressed the underlying problem. A sophisticated understanding that magical and mundane methods could complement each other. The water management systems of Sol Udar represented engineering achievements that demonstrate remarkable sophistication. You would have traced aqueducts that brought fresh water from underground rivers throughout the realm, and modern engineers who have studied intact sections marvel at their design. The channels maintained consistent flow through gravity alone, with gradients calculated to precise tolerances that ensured adequate water pressure throughout the system. Separate networks handled waste removal, carrying sewage to treatment chambers far from living areas. based on archaeological evidence from these treatment areas. The dwarves employed both natural decomposition processes and what appears to be magical acceleration of breakdown, creating systems that remained functional for millennia with minimal maintenance. The agricultural systems of Sol Udar fed a substantial population through careful cultivation in specialized chambers. You would have worked in fungal farms, vast areas where cultivated mushrooms and other cave-dwelling plants grew in carefully controlled conditions. The varieties discovered in these abandoned farms, still growing after thousands of years, show signs of selective breeding over many generations. The dwarves developed species optimized for nutrition, flavor, or medicinal properties, creating a diverse food supply entirely independent of surface agriculture. The most advanced farms operated on multiple levels, with different species occupying different vertical zones based on their specific requirements for moisture, temperature, and the type of magical lighting employed. The livestock operations focused on creatures adapted to underground life. Deep Rithae, the subterranean cattle, provided meat, milk, hide, and horn for various purposes. Based on skeletal remains found in ancient pens, the Rithae herds of Sol Udar were larger and more robust than their wild counterparts, suggesting millennia of selective breeding to improve herd quality. The dwarves also maintained populations of other species, including blind cave fish raised in underground ponds and various types of edible insects cultivated for their high protein content. This diversified food production created resilience, ensuring that failure of any single food source would not lead to starvation. The concept of time in Sol Udar operated differently than in surface communities. Though we can only speculate about specifics based on the massive water clocks discovered in public areas, you would have followed a day divided into shifts, with work and rest periods staggered, so that the forges and other essential operations never ceased. These water clocks, some still functional after millennia, marked time with remarkable precision. The largest examples discovered so far stand over 20 feet tall, with complex mechanisms that tracked not just hours, but also lunar cycles and possibly planar alignments. This suggests a culture that valued precise timekeeping, likely necessary for coordinating the complex operations of a major subterranean civilization. The legal system of Sol Udar, based on fragmentary law codes recovered from the ruins, balanced clan traditions with broader civic law. You would have understood that certain matters fell under clan jurisdiction, while others required intervention from higher authority. The codes that survive show a sophisticated understanding of justice, with different categories of offenses and proportional punishments. Minor crimes faced fines or restitution requirements. Serious violations merited exile, which for a Dwarven clan society represented a punishment worse than death for many. The ultimate sanction was execution combined with striking the criminal's name from all records, a form of damnatio memoriae that erased the offender from history itself. The festivals and celebrations of Sol Udar marked important events and reinforced community bonds. You would have participated in ceremonies whose names survive in modern Mror tradition, though their original forms may have changed over millennia. The festival of first forging likely commemorated the lighting of the original forges when Sol Udar was founded. The Feast of Stone honored the mountain itself and the ancestors who carved the first halls. These celebrations served social functions beyond mere entertainment, reinforcing clan identities while also emphasizing the shared culture that bound all Sol Udar dwarves together. The fact that modern Mror clans still observe versions of these festivals, passed down through oral tradition for 9,000 years, speaks to their deep cultural significance. The music of Sol Udar evolved into forms that took advantage of the unique acoustic properties of carved stone chambers. You would have attended performances in amphitheaters designed specifically for optimal sound quality, where the shape of walls and ceiling created perfect resonance. The instruments discovered in the ruins include drums and bells, which would have created rhythms that echoed through passages. But there were also stringed instruments and wind instruments, suggesting a musical tradition more diverse than simple martial music. Some chambers show acoustic properties that could only have been created intentionally. Rooms where even a whisper carries to every corner, or where sounds from different locations blend in specific harmonic patterns. The golden age of Sol Udar represented the height of ancient Dwarven civilization, a time when a highly magical society combined sophisticated arcane science with masterful craftsmanship to create wonders. You lived in a realm that had achieved remarkable stability, with institutions that functioned smoothly across generations, where innovation continued alongside respect for tradition, based on the extent and quality of what has been recovered. This was a civilization operating at a level that modern Corvair, even with all the achievements of the Five Nations, struggles to match in certain areas. Their understanding of planar mechanics, their integration of magic into infrastructure, their techniques for creating permanent magical effects. These represent knowledge that was largely lost when Sol Udar fell. Yet beneath this prosperity, subtle changes were occurring that no one fully understood. The manifest zones that had blessed Sol Udar with advantages for millennia were shifting in ways that would prove catastrophic. But we will explore that darkness in the next section, when Zoriat drew close and madness seeped through the cracks in reality. Section 3. The Delker Invasion and Corruption. The change began approximately 9,000 years ago, during the period that scholars now call the Delker War. You would have noticed the signs first in the deepest chambers, where workers reported hearing whispers in languages that had no structure, sounds that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and speak directly into the mind. The stone itself began to behave strangely, and the reports that survive from this period describe ore veins twisting into impossible geometries, crystal formations growing overnight in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The manifest zone connection to Zoriat, which had been a barely perceptible presence throughout Sol Udar's history, suddenly strengthened as the realm of madness became coterminous with Eberron, drawing close enough that the barriers between worlds wore thin as parchment. The leadership of Sol Udar initially treated these phenomena with scholarly interest rather than alarm. You would have attended council meetings where researchers presented their findings, describing how certain chambers now exhibited properties that defied physical law. Based on fragmentary records recovered from the ruins, we know they documented these changes meticulously, approaching the situation as an opportunity for study rather than recognizing it as existential threat. Objects left in affected spaces would sometimes transform metal developing organic properties, stone growing softer like flesh. Time itself became unreliable in the worst affected areas, with minutes passing like hours or hours compressing into moments. The council ordered these chambers sealed and posted guards, but this could imply they still believed the situation could be contained through conventional means. The realm of Zoriat operates according to rules that mortal minds cannot fully comprehend. You need to understand that this is not simply another dimension with different physical laws. Zoriat is the realm of madness, a plane where reality itself becomes fluid, where thought and matter intermingle in ways that violate every principle of natural philosophy. The entities that inhabit this realm, the Daelker and their servants, exist in ways that contradict everything mortals understand about life and consciousness. They are not evil in the conventional sense that a demon or devil might be. They are alien, operating from motivations and desires that bear no relationship to mortal concerns. Their very presence in the material world creates distortions, warping reality around them simply by existing. The Daelker began manifesting across Western Corvair as Zoriat grew coterminous with the material plane. You would have heard reports filtering into Sol Udar from surface contacts, news of the great Dakani Empire to the west facing an invasion. Unlike anything in recorded history, the Hobgoblin Empire, which had ruled much of Western Corvair for millennia, found its legions unable to fight an enemy that twisted reality itself. Where the Daelker lords walked, the land transformed. Stone became flesh. Rivers ran with madness instead of water. Entire cities were corrupted into nightmare reflections of their former selves. But Sol Udar faced its own invasion, for the manifest zones beneath the Ironroot Mountains made the realm below an ideal gateway for Zoriat's influence to enter the material world. The first Daelker manifestation in Sol Udar appeared without warning in one of the sealed chambers. You would have been working your shift when the screams began. Sounds of terror, unlike anything heard before in the realm's long history. The guards posted outside died instantly, though exactly how remains unclear from the fragmentary accounts. What we know from later expeditions and modern encounters with Daelkyr is that these entities possess abilities that defy categorization. They can manipulate flesh and bone, reshaping living tissue into new configurations. They can alter perception, making victims see things that are not there or fail to see things that are. Most terrifyingly, they can corrupt the very substance of reality, transforming inorganic matter into living tissue, or vice versa. The entity moved through affected districts, and everything it touched became corrupted. You would have fled alongside others, watching in horror as stone walls began to pulse with alien life, as metal melted and reformed into shapes that screamed. The very air thickened, taking on colors that should not exist. Dwarves caught by the Daelkyr's influence transformed, their bodies twisting into new shapes. Some became Dalgons, the bipedal creatures with 4 arms and tentacled faces that remain common in the ruins today. Others merged together, multiple individuals fusing into single malformed bodies to create the first Dalgrims. Still, others were incorporated into their surroundings, becoming part of the corrupted stone itself, conscious but unable to move or speak, trapped in eternal torment. The warriors of Sol Udar responded with the courage their culture had cultivated over generations. You would have seen defenders converging on affected areas, with weapons drawn and prayers to the sovereign host on their lips. They formed shield walls and advanced in disciplined ranks, exactly as their training dictated. But conventional tactics proved ineffective against enemies that existed partially outside reality. Based on accounts from other theaters of the Daelkyr War, we know that arrows fired at Daelkyr servants sometimes hit, sometimes passed through as if striking smoke, sometimes reversed direction mid-flight. Swords that struck true might cut flesh, or might simply cease to exist, or might bond with the aberration's form and become extensions of its body. The battle for the Forge districts, if we can piece together the sequence of events from recovered fragments, lasted for an extended period during which time itself became unreliable. You would have fought alongside clanmates, watching friends and family fall to corruption or death. The Daelkyr seemed to take pleasure in the creativity of their transformations, crafting new aberrations from captured dwarves. Dalgrims emerged from the chaos, small twisted creatures that had once been 2 or more dwarves merged into single malformed bodies. These abominations retained fragments of their original personalities, enough to recognize loved ones, enough to beg for death, even as they attacked under Daelkyr control. The psychological horror of fighting creatures that wore familiar faces proved as devastating as the physical battle itself. Additional Daelker manifestations appeared in other parts of Sol Udar as the invasion intensified. You realized with growing despair that this was not a single incursion, but rather a coordinated assault. Each of the Daelker lords possessed different abilities and created different types of servants. Dirn the Corruptor specialized in biological transformation, crafting new life forms from existing creatures. Belashra, the Lord of Eyes, focused on perception and knowledge, creating servants covered in functioning eyeballs that saw through multiple realities simultaneously. The Daelker lords mentioned in recovered texts each presented unique challenges, and the defenders found themselves fighting on multiple fronts against enemies that followed no consistent rules. The decision to seal off entire districts rather than let the corruption spread unchecked came after significant portions of Sol Udar had already fallen. You would have participated in desperate evacuation efforts, helping to guide civilians through passages still considered safe, while combat engineers prepared to collapse tunnels. Entire neighborhoods where dwarves had lived for generations were abandoned within hours or days. Forges that had burned continuously for millennia were left to cool and die. Libraries containing irreplaceable knowledge were sealed away, their contents deemed less important than preventing aberrations from reaching uncontaminated areas. Each sealed door represented tactical retreat, but also the death of a piece of Dwarven history and culture. The corruption proved impossible to contain through physical barriers alone. You discovered that Daelker influence could spread through stone itself, moving like infection through the very foundations of Sol Udar. Walls that seemed solid would suddenly develop pustules that burst to release clouds of spores. And these spores, when inhaled, began transformation in living beings. Floors became soft and sticky, reaching up to grab at feet like living things. Ceilings dripped with acidic secretions that dissolved metal and flesh alike. The realm itself was becoming a hostile environment, turning against the dwarves who had created it over countless generations. The artificers and wizards of Sol Udar worked desperately to develop weapons and defenses effective against Daelker corruption. You would have assisted in their workshops, following instructions to create items imbued with protective enchantments. They discovered through trial and terrible error that certain types of magic proved more effective than others. Abjuration spells that created barriers between realities could slow the spread of corruption. Radiant energy, particularly that channeled through clerics devoted to the sovereign host, caused pain to Daelker servants. The most effective weapons incorporated both steel and spell. Blades enchanted with magic, designed to disrupt the aberration's connection to the material world. But these countermeasures came too late to save Sol Udar. The symbiont weapons created by the Daelker represented a particularly insidious aspect of the invasion. You would have encountered these living items and modern explorers still find them in the ruins today. They appear as belts, gloves, cloaks, or armor pieces crafted from what seems to be leather or chitin, but they pulse with internal life. Once attached, a symbiont bonds at a cellular level with its host, granting enhanced abilities like increased strength, speed, or magical power. But the symbiont also slowly corrupts the host's mind, making them more receptive to Daelker influence. Eventually, most who bond with symbionts transform into Dalgons or similar aberrations, their original identities completely subsumed by the corruption. The psychological toll of the invasion proved as devastating as the physical losses. You would have seen strong warriors break down, unable to process the horrors they had witnessed. Civilians developed what modern healers would recognize as symptoms of trauma, unable to sleep without nightmares, jumping at every unexpected sound, withdrawing from social contact. The temples of the sovereign host overflowed with those seeking comfort or answers, demanding to know why the gods had abandoned them to this fate. Many clerics struggled to maintain their own faith while trying to provide spiritual support to others. And based on what we can infer from recovered religious texts, some fell into despair themselves, questioning divine order that would permit such corruption to exist. The decision to abandon Sol Udar came after the defenders realized they could not win. You would have attended councils where clan leaders, many bearing scars from personal combat, presented grim reports. Large portions of the realm had fallen to corruption. The population had been devastated through death, transformation, or evacuation to the surface. The remaining defenders were exhausted, supplies were running low, and most critically, there was no realistic hope of reclaiming the lost districts. Every day brought new incursions as more Daelker servants spawned or manifested through the strengthened manifest zones. The realm that had stood for thousands of years was dying, and nothing the Dwarves did seemed capable of stopping its death. The evacuation prioritized saving as many lives as possible, while also preserving whatever knowledge could be carried. You would have worked in relay teams, hauling crates of documents and artifacts through passages that connected Sol Udar to the surface settlements where the exiled clans had established themselves. The most valuable items received priority. Sacred texts from the temples, technical manuals detailing smithing techniques and artifice secrets, genealogical records that preserved clan histories, objects of legendary power that could not be allowed to fall into Daelker hands. Everything else, the accumulated wealth and art and daily possessions of countless dwarves, had to be left behind. The sheer volume of what was abandoned still haunts Dwarven cultural memory today. The sealing of Sol Udar required a combination of physical engineering and magical ritual of unprecedented scope. You would have participated in the final defense, holding the line, while artificers and clerics worked together to create wards of immense power. They drew upon every magical tradition known to Dwarven culture, dragon shards were incorporated into massive seal stones, their crystalline structures attuned to block planar energies. Clerics called upon the sovereign host to bless the barriers, invoking divine power to reinforce mortal craft. Wizards wove complex abjurations, creating layered defenses designed to contain the corruption. The work took considerable time, and defenders died buying time for the seal crafters to complete their work. The last dwarves to leave Sol Udar emerged carrying tales of horror that seemed impossible to believe. You would have tried to describe what you had witnessed, but words failed to capture the full scope of the nightmare. How could you explain stone that screamed? How could you make someone understand what it meant to fight your own brother after he had been transformed into a Dalgaunt? How could you convey the soul-deep wrongness of seeing reality itself twist and break? Many survivors chose not to speak of their experiences at all, carrying their trauma in silence. Others became obsessed with warning future generations, insisting that the seals must never be broken, that Sol Udar must remain sealed forever. The Daelker War eventually ended when the planar alignments shifted, and Soriat's coterminous period concluded, the realm of madness drawing distant from the material world once more. You would have celebrated this reprieve, but it came too late for Sol Udar. The realm remained sealed, the corruption trapped but not destroyed. The Dwarven clans that had fled to the surface, both the 13 who had been exiled before the invasion and those who escaped during the fall, built new societies in the Ironroot Mountains above. They preserved what knowledge had been saved, maintained vigilance against aberrations that occasionally escaped from the sealed depths, and passed down the story so that future generations would remember what had been lost and what lurked below. Section 4. The Twisted Remnants. The ruins of Sol Udar today bear almost no resemblance to the glorious realm that once thrived beneath the mountains. You descend through breached seals or forgotten passages discovered by modern miners, and the wrongness becomes apparent immediately. The air tastes metallic and sweet simultaneously, carrying scents that trigger instinctive revulsion in mortal beings. The temperature fluctuates without pattern, shifting from bitter cold to oppressive heat within the span of a few steps. Light behaves strangely here, bending around corners that should not exist, casting shadows that move independently of their sources. This is not merely a dead city. Based on what explorers have documented, Sol Udar has become something alive in the most terrible sense. A vast organism of corrupted stone and twisted flesh that has continued to evolve over 9 millennia. The Dalgaunts represent the most commonly encountered aberrations in the ruins, and you need to understand what they once were to fully appreciate the horror of what they have become. These creatures stand roughly 6 feet tall, with pale, rubbery skin that glistens with perpetual moisture. They possess 4 arms, each ending in 3-fingered hands with elongated digits, capable of wielding weapons or tools. But the most disturbing feature is the face, or rather the lack of one. Where eyes and nose should be, there is only smooth skin stretched tight over the skull. The mouth has been replaced by a mass of writhing tentacles that serve as sensory organs, allowing the Dalgaunt to taste the air, detect vibrations, and perceive its environment in ways that defy normal senses. These were dwarves once, individuals with names and families and dreams, transformed by Daelker corruption into something alien. You would encounter Dalgaunts in organized groups throughout the ruins, and modern explorers report that they display tactical intelligence, suggesting retained cognitive abilities. They patrol certain areas, maintain what could be interpreted as territories, and pursue goals beyond simple predation. Some Dalgaunts have been observed performing maintenance on corrupted infrastructure, working with tools in ways that suggest procedural memory from their previous lives. Others tend to what can only be described as breeding pits, chambers where new aberrations gestate in pools of alchemical slime. The most disturbing Dalgaunts are those that seem to recognize other dwarves, creatures that pause before attacking, as if struggling with fragmentary memories. These moments of hesitation never last long. The corruption always reasserts itself, and the Dalgaunt resumes its attack with renewed ferocity. The Dalgrims present a different kind of horror, smaller and more numerous than Dalgaunts, but equally dangerous. You would recognize them as fusion creatures, aberrations created by merging two or more dwarves into a single malformed body. They stand only 3 to 4 feet tall, with squat torsos that support too many limbs emerging at wrong angles. A Dalgrim might have 4 arms of varying lengths, or 3 legs that force it to move in a lurching gait, or multiple heads that argue with each other in broken fragments of the Dwarven language. The transformation process that creates Dalgrims appears to be imperfect, leaving the merged personalities partially intact. This means a Dalgrim might pause mid-combat to have a conversation with itself, different voices emerging from different mouths as the component personalities struggle for control. The Dalgrim populations in Sol Udar have adapted to the environment over 9,000 years, developing behaviors that make them effective despite their physical limitations. You would find them living in warrens carved into the corrupted stone, complex tunnel systems too small for larger creatures to navigate easily. They hunt in packs, using crude weapons scavenged from the ruins or crafted from bone and corrupted metal. Their pack tactics show surprising coordination, with different Dalgrims taking on specialized roles. Some act as scouts, their multiple sets of eyes providing comprehensive surveillance. Others serve as brutes, using superior strength to overwhelm prey. Still, others function as spellcasters, channeling crude magical abilities that manifest as bolts of crackling energy or waves of disorienting mental static. The symbionts that infest Sol Udar represent living weapons and items that actively seek hosts to bond with. You would encounter these creatures appearing as belts, cloaks, gloves, or amulets crafted from what looks like supple leather or chitinous plates, but they pulse with internal life, warm to the touch, sometimes breathing in slow rhythms. When a symbiont detects a potential host, it strikes like a serpent, wrapping around the target and bonding at a cellular level within moments. The attachment provides immediate benefits that can be seductive. A tentacle whip symbiont grants an additional limb capable of attacking at range. A crawling gauntlet symbiont increases hand strength and provides natural weapons in the form of claws or spikes. An Eyes of Beyond symbiont grants enhanced vision, allowing the host to see in complete darkness or perceive invisible creatures. But these benefits come at a terrible cost that becomes apparent only gradually. You would feel the symbiont's influence growing stronger with each passing day, its alien consciousness bleeding into your thoughts. It whispers suggestions, encouraging violence or cruelty, pushing you toward actions that serve Daelker interests. The physical corruption follows mental deterioration, based on what scholars have documented from those who bonded with symbionts and were later examined. Skin where the symbiont attaches begins to change texture, becoming more like the symbiont itself. The host's biology slowly adapts to accommodate the parasite, with organs shifting position and bones restructuring. Most who bond with symbionts eventually transform into Dalgons or similar aberrations, their original identities completely subsumed by the corruption over weeks or months. The corrupted Dwarven remnants represent perhaps the most tragic inhabitants of Sol Udar. You would encounter these entities in the deeper levels, dwarves who never fully transformed into aberrations, but cannot be considered living in any meaningful sense. Some have been partially incorporated into the walls themselves, their upper bodies protruding from corrupted stone, while their lower halves merge with the architecture. These unfortunates remain conscious, aware of their surroundings, able to speak and think. Modern explorers report that they beg passing adventurers for death, sometimes offering information or directions to treasure in exchange for the mercy of a swift end. But killing them proves difficult, as their connection to the corrupted stone means they share its resilience to damage. Other corrupted dwarves wander the halls, as if still performing daily routines from before the fall. You would see a smith standing before a cold forge, going through the motions of hammering metal that does not exist, his body covered in tumorous growths that pulse in rhythm with his phantom work. A merchant sits in a ruined market stall, calling out prices for goods long since turned to dust, her eyes replaced by clusters of smaller eyes that track movement independently. A warrior patrols a corridor, armor fused directly to flesh, still following orders given 9,000 years ago by commanders who have been dead for millennia. These remnants pose little direct threat to explorers, but their presence adds to the psychological horror of exploring Sol Udar. They serve as reminders of what was lost, living monuments to Daelker cruelty. The deeper sealed levels of Sol Udar remain largely unexplored, protected by wards and barriers that have held for thousands of years. You would approach these sealed doors with trepidation, feeling the wrongness radiating from beyond, even through layers of stone and magic. The seals themselves have become works of art through necessity, complex weaves of abjuration magic reinforced with physical barriers and religious wards. Symbols of the sovereign host cover every surface, prayers carved into metal and stone, holy water mixed into mortar. But even these mighty defenses show signs of strain after 9 millennia. Cracks appear in the stone. The magical energy fluctuates, sometimes surging to dangerous levels, other times weakening to barely perceptible strength. Something beyond these seals pushes against them constantly, testing for weakness, probing for any opening. The few accounts from explorers who have breached these deeper seals describe environments that defy rational description. You would enter chambers where gravity operates in multiple directions simultaneously, where you might walk on the ceiling while your companions walk on the walls, all of you perceiving your own orientation as normal. Rooms where time flows at different rates in different locations exist in the deepest areas, based on reports from survivors. Some explorers have aged years in seconds on one side of a chamber, while the other side experienced decades compressed into moments. Spaces that are larger on the inside than physically possible appear throughout the deeper levels. Corridors that stretch for miles despite being contained within chambers that measure only feet across from the outside. The manifest zone connection to Zoriat grows strongest in these depths, creating areas where the barrier between realities has worn tissue thin or broken entirely. The manifest zones themselves create pockets where reality becomes negotiable within Sol Udar. You would recognize these areas by the distortions visible even from a distance. The air shimmers and warps, revealing glimpses of impossible geometries that exist in dimensions mortal eyes cannot properly process. Sound behaves unpredictably, with echoes arriving before the original noise or conversations from different times overlapping in cacophonous confusion. Temperature becomes meaningless, with fire that freezes and ice that burns. The strongest manifest zones contain actual portals to Zoriat, gaping wounds in reality through which you can see directly into the realm of madness. Shapes move on the other side, entities too alien to properly perceive, their forms shifting between different states of existence too rapidly for mortal minds to track. The creatures that emerge from these manifest zones represent current generation Daelker servants, not simply the transformed dwarves from 9,000 years ago. You would face chokers, aberrations that resemble elongated humanoids with unnaturally long arms ending in strangling tentacles. These creatures lurk in shadows, using their flexibility to hide in spaces that should be too small, then emerging to throttle victims with surprising strength. Gibbering mouthers appear in some areas, masses of eyes and mouths that roll across floors and ceilings, constantly producing sounds that induce madness in listeners. Mind flayers occasionally venture through the portals, drawn by the psychic resonance of corrupted minds, and some have established small colonies in the deepest accessible levels. The architecture itself has become weaponized in many areas of Sol Udar. You would navigate corridors where the walls close in slowly, crushing anything caught between them. Floors that suddenly open into pits filled with acidic sludge, or nests of razor-sharp crystals create constant danger. Ceilings that rain down corrosive slime or clouds of spores force explorers to maintain constant vigilance. Staircases shift configuration while you climb them, leading to different destinations than where they originally connected. Doors open onto solid walls, bottomless voids, or pockets of vacuum that suck the air from your lungs. The realm has become a vast trap, every element designed to capture, kill, or corrupt intruders who venture into its depths. The treasures that remain in Sol Udar continue to draw adventurers despite all these dangers. You would seek legendary weapons forged during the Golden Age, armor that provides protection beyond anything modern artificers can create, artifacts of power that could shift the balance in current political conflicts. These items exist, scattered throughout the ruins. Some lie in plain sight, others remain hidden in vaults that have resisted corruption. But claiming them requires navigating all the dangers described, plus dealing with the fact that many treasures have themselves been corrupted. A sword that once served righteously might now hunger for innocent blood. Armor that protected its wearer could slowly consume them. An amulet of protection might actually serve as a beacon, drawing aberrations to its location rather than repelling them. The knowledge contained in Sol Udar's archives represents another type of treasure that scholars seek. You would brave the ruins looking for smithing techniques lost to the modern age artifice schemas that could revolutionize magical item creation, historical records that answer questions about ancient corvair. Some of this knowledge survives in readable form, etched on metal plates that resisted corruption, or recorded in books protected by preservation spells. But most written materials have been destroyed or transformed in ways that make them unusable. You might find a book whose pages are now made of living flesh, the text constantly rewriting itself as you try to read it. Stone tablets where the carved letters move and rearrange, spelling out messages from Daelker rather than the original content. Scrolls that speak aloud in voices of the dead, reciting their contents, but adding whispered suggestions that eat away at sanity with each word heard. The question of whether Sol Udar can ever be reclaimed remains hotly debated among the clans of the Mror Holds. You would hear optimists argue that with sufficient force and magical support, the corruption could be cleansed, the aberrations destroyed or driven back, the realm restored to something resembling its former state. They point to isolated successes, expeditions that cleared and held small sections of the upper levels for extended periods before being overwhelmed. But the pessimists counter that the corruption has spread too deep, that it has literally become part of the stone itself, that cleansing Sol Udar would require destroying the very thing they hope to reclaim. Based on what we know about the extent of Daelker corruption and the strength of the manifest zones, the pessimists may be correct. The deeper truth, which scholars have begun to recognize, is that Sol Udar serves a purpose in its current corrupted state. You would come to understand that the Daelker never simply destroyed the realm out of malice. They transformed it into a monument to their power, a demonstration of what happens when mortal civilizations grow too confident. Sol Udar stands as both warning and lure, drawing the ambitious and foolish into its depths, providing the Daelker with test subjects and potential servants. Every dwarf transformed into an aberration, every adventurer corrupted by a symbiont, every mind broken by exposure to the manifest zones adds to the realm's power. The ruins grow stronger with each passing century, not weaker. And what was sealed away 9,000 years ago has been evolving in the darkness, adapting, waiting for the day when the barriers finally fail. Section 5. Modern Expeditions and Eternal Warning. The rediscovery of Sol Udar occurred approximately 2 centuries ago, though the exact date varies depending on which clan's account you trust. Miners of Clan Mror broke through into previously unknown passages while expanding their operations beneath the Mror Holds, and what they found changed everything. You would have been there when the first breach team entered those ancient halls, lamps held high, expecting natural caverns or perhaps forgotten storage chambers. Instead, they discovered carved walls bearing the unmistakable mark of ancient Dwarven craftsmanship, symbols and writing in dialects that had not been spoken in thousands of years. The excitement spread rapidly through the clan holdings. Stories passed down through generations, tales dismissed by some as legend or exaggeration, suddenly gained new weight and credibility. Sol Udar was real. It had been found, and immediately the question arose of what should be done about it. The initial expeditions proceeded with caution born of ancient warnings preserved in oral tradition. You would have joined survey teams that mapped the accessible upper levels, documenting what remained intact and cataloging the obvious dangers. These early explorers found districts that showed signs of organized evacuation rather than panicked flight, suggesting that the final abandonment followed some kind of plan. Tables still held place settings from meals interrupted thousands of years ago. Tools lay arranged on workbenches, as if their owners had simply stepped away for a moment. Personal possessions remained in residential dwellings. Jewelry and clan heirlooms left behind because survival took priority over material wealth. The poignancy of these discoveries affected even the most hardened explorers, confronting them with evidence that this had been home to real people whose descendants still lived in the mountains above. But you also encountered the corruption that had consumed the lower levels. And this is where the ancient warnings proved horrifyingly accurate. The survey teams quickly learned to recognize signs of Daelker influence that matched descriptions preserved in fragmentary texts and oral tradition. Stone that felt wrong to the touch, slightly warm and pulsing with internal movement. Air that tasted of copper and decay. Sounds that seemed to come from multiple directions simultaneously. Whispers in languages that caused headaches when you tried to understand them. The first encounters with Dalgaunts and Dalgrims resulted in casualties, with several team members killed and others wounded by creatures they had no context for understanding, until scholars consulted the oldest records and realized these were the aberrations mentioned in ancient accounts. The recovery of artifacts from Sol Udar became a major economic activity within the Mror Holds. You would have witnessed the rise of specialized expedition companies, organizations that recruited experienced adventurers and equipped them for delving into the ruins. These companies operated under contracts with various clans, agreeing to turn over percentages of recovered items in exchange for official sanction and logistical support. The most successful expeditions brought back treasures of legendary value that validated all the risks. Weapons forged by master smiths thousands of years ago, their edges still sharp, their enchantments still functioning perfectly, suits of armor that adjusted to fit their wearers and provided protection beyond anything modern artificers could replicate. Books and tablets containing knowledge of techniques that had been considered lost forever. The dangers of these expeditions cannot be overstated, and the casualty rates speak for themselves. You would have prepared for weeks before each delve, studying maps created by previous survivors, gathering intelligence about which areas showed recent aberration activity, ensuring your team included members with healing abilities and magical support. Even with all precautions, many expeditions never returned. Entire teams vanished without trace, their fates unknown, but easily imagined by those who had seen what lurked in the depths. Others returned with reduced numbers, carrying wounded or corrupted members who required immediate treatment and sometimes mercy killing. The psychological toll on survivors manifested in various ways, with many explorers developing symptoms that healers recognized as lasting trauma from witnessing horrors that mortal minds struggle to process. The creation of forward camps within Sol Udar represented attempts to establish permanent footholds in the ruins. You would have helped construct these fortified positions in chambers deemed relatively safe, areas where the corruption seemed less intense and aberration activity remained minimal. These camps served as staging points for deeper expeditions, places where teams could rest and resupply without returning to the surface. Some camps featured permanent defenses, walls reinforced with both stone and magic, wards carved into floor and ceiling to repel aberrations. The largest camp, designated Forward Position Mror, maintained a garrison for nearly 2 years, based on records from the expedition companies. It fell eventually to a coordinated Dalgaunt assault that left no survivors, and the site remains sealed today, considered too dangerous to reclaim. The political implications of Sol Udar's rediscovery created tensions within the Mror Holds that persist to this day. You would have attended clan meetings where representatives argued about ownership and access rights. Every major clan could trace lineage back to the ancient realm, could claim ancestors who had lived and worked in Sol Udar before its fall, who had the right to explore the ruins, who controlled the artifacts recovered there. Should recovered knowledge be shared freely among all dwarves, or did it belong to the clans whose members risked their lives to retrieve it? These questions sparked disputes that occasionally escalated to violence, with expeditions from rival clans clashing in the ruins over claims to particularly valuable sites. The clan council eventually established regulations and guidelines, but enforcement in the depths of Sol Udar proved nearly impossible. The connection between Sol Udar and broader events in Eberron became clearer as scholars analyzed recovered materials. You would have studied documents detailing the Daelker War, cross-referencing them with accounts from other sources across Corvair. The dwarves of Sol Udar were not the only victims of that ancient catastrophe. The entire western continent suffered during the age when Zoriat became coterminous. The hobgoblin empire of Dakon, which had ruled vast territories, fell to similar corruption, with their cities transformed into nightmare realms. Based on what we can piece together from multiple sources, civilizations across Corvair were devastated during this period. Sol Udar represented one of the most complete records of the Daelker War, preserving evidence and knowledge that helped scholars understand the full scope of what had occurred 9,000 years ago. The question of whether the Daelker could return haunts modern discussions about Sol Udar and Zoriat's planar cycle. You would hear debates among scholars and clerics about the nature of these cycles, the movements of moons and planes that govern when connections between worlds strengthen or weaken. Zoriat operates on a vast timescale, with the realm of madness drawing close to the material world only during specific alignments. The exact calculations remain uncertain, and this could imply that ancient astronomers either did not fully understand the cycles, or that their records were lost during the fall. Some scholars warn that Zoriat's next coterminous period could occur within centuries, though others argue that thousands of years remain. All agree that when Zoriat does draw near again, Sol Udar will serve as a gateway, a place where the barriers are already weakened and Daelker influence can manifest with terrible ease. The attempts to cleanse portions of Sol Udar have met with limited and temporary success at best. You would have participated in sanctification rituals, ceremonies where clerics of the sovereign host called upon divine power to drive corruption from stone and metal. These rituals worked on small scales, allowing teams to reclaim individual chambers or short stretches of corridor. But the corruption always returned eventually, seeping back through the stone like infection through a wound. Based on what practitioners report, more aggressive approaches using powerful abjuration magic or even controlled demolition achieved temporary results, but proved unsustainable. The resources required to permanently cleanse even a single district exceeded what the Mror Holds could reasonably commit. And the fundamental question remained whether the effort was worth the cost when so much had been irreversibly corrupted. The discovery of living dwarves in Sol Udar, descendants of those who never evacuated, shocked the exploration community when it first occurred. You would have encountered these survivors in isolated pockets of the mid-levels, communities that had somehow maintained their existence for 9 millennia in near-complete isolation from the surface world. They spoke archaic dialects that modern linguists struggled to understand. They practiced customs that seemed bizarre to modern dwarves. Their appearance showed the effects of countless generations spent underground, with pale skin, oversized eyes adapted to darkness, and physical builds that reflected malnutrition and the genetic bottlenecks of small, isolated populations. Some communities had devolved into primitive savagery, barely recognizable as dwarves. Others maintained surprising sophistication, preserving knowledge and traditions from before the fall while adapting to their hostile environment. Most tragically, many showed signs of corruption, their members displaying subtle mutations or aberrant characteristics that suggested slow transformation over generations. The fate of these survivor communities sparked ethical debates that continue today. You would have heard arguments that they should be evacuated to the surface, given opportunities to rejoin mainstream Dwarven society and access to proper nutrition and medical care. But many survivors refused such offers when presented, insisting that Sol Udar was their home, and they had no desire to abandon it for a surface world they had never known. Others proved so psychologically damaged or physically corrupted that integration became impossible or dangerous. Some expeditions simply left them alone, respecting their right to live as they chose. Other teams attempted forced evacuations, leading to violence and resentment. A few survivor communities proved actively hostile towards surface dwarves, viewing them as invaders who had abandoned Sol Udar in its time of need, and now returned only to loot its treasures. The role of Sol Udar in modern Eberron politics extends beyond the Mror Holds. Based on intelligence reports, and diplomatic incidents. You would have learned that agencies from multiple nations maintained interest in the ruins for various reasons. The kingdom of Breland sought information about Daelker weaknesses, hoping to develop weapons or defenses against aberrations that could threaten national security. Onder's magical academies wanted access to artifice knowledge that could advance their research and maintain their reputation for arcane innovation. Reports suggest that even the Lord of Blades, the warforged revolutionary, allegedly sent agents to recover technology that might be adapted for his purposes. The Dreaming Dark, the quarry-led conspiracy from Sarlona, supposedly monitored Sol Udar as well, though their exact interest remains unclear. The ruins became a flashpoint for international intrigue, with expeditions sometimes serving as cover for espionage or sabotage between rival powers. The economic impact of Sol Udar on the Mror Holds proved substantial and continues today. You would have witnessed the rise of support industries catering to expeditions. Smiths specialized in crafting weapons reported to be effective against aberrations, using techniques adapted from recovered texts. Alchemists developed concoctions that supposedly protected against corruption or enhanced resistance to mental domination, though the actual efficacy of these preparations varied wildly. Healers trained specifically in treating exotic injuries and conditions associated with ruins exploration. Mapmakers sold charts of varying accuracy and reliability, with some being genuine attempts to document the ruins and others being outright fraudulent. Fortune tellers offered predictions about safe routes and profitable sites. This economic activity enriched some clans while leaving others struggling to compete, and the influx of wealth from recovered artifacts created new merchant dynasties and shifted traditional power structures. The establishment of research outposts near Sol Udar allowed for more systematic study of the ruins and their inhabitants. You would have worked at these facilities, analyzing specimens brought back by expeditions, documenting aberration behaviors, testing theories about the nature of Daelker corruption. The research produced valuable knowledge, but also raised disturbing questions. Why did some individuals prove more resistant to corruption than others? Could the transformation process be reversed, or at least halted once begun? Were the Daelker truly gone, or did they maintain some presence within Sol Udar even now? The answers to these questions remained elusive, complicated by the fact that each experiment risked unleashing corruption into the research facility itself, requiring elaborate containment procedures and constant vigilance. The legendary treasures still hidden in Sol Udar's depths continue to draw expeditions despite 9,000 years of looting and countless casualties. You would have heard stories of the Forge Eternal, a mythical smithy in the lowest accessible levels, where weapons of godlike power were supposedly created during the Golden Age. Tales speak of the Vault of Houses, a chamber supposedly containing the accumulated wealth of all major clans at the height of their prosperity. The Library of Stone allegedly holds knowledge carved into living rock itself, information too valuable to trust to any less permanent medium. Whether these legendary sites actually exist remains unknown. Many expeditions have sought them over the past 2 centuries. None have returned with proof of discovery, though this could simply mean that those who found these treasures chose not to share that information. The possibility keeps adventurers coming, each convinced that they will be the ones to succeed where so many others have failed. The mutations observed in long-term explorers of Sol Udar raised troubling questions about exposure limits and safety protocols. You would have undergone regular medical examinations after each expedition, with healers checking for signs of corruption that might manifest weeks or months after direct contact with affected areas. Some changes proved subtle, barely noticeable shifts in temperament or minor physical alterations like changes in eye color or hair texture. Others developed more dramatically, with explorers growing tumors that pulsed with alien life, experiencing hallucinations that might actually be perceptions bleeding through from other realities, displaying abilities that seemed magical, but followed no known principles of spellcasting. The question of when an affected explorer should be quarantined or even killed for the safety of others proved agonizing. With no clear guidelines, and each case requiring individual evaluation by healers and clan leaders. The religious significance of Sol Udar has made it a pilgrimage site for some dwarves despite official discouragement. You would have encountered these pilgrims in the safer upper levels, devotees seeking to pray at ancient temples or trace the paths their ancestors walked thousands of years ago. Some came seeking spiritual enlightenment, believing that confronting the ruins' horrors would strengthen their faith in the sovereign host. Others hoped for visions or communications from the gods, believing that divine powers might speak more clearly in a place where sacred and profane forces clashed so dramatically. A few sought martyrdom, viewing transformation into an aberration as a form of sacrifice that might somehow redeem the fall of Sol Udar or atone for ancient failures. Religious authorities generally discouraged these pilgrimages, arguing that they served no spiritual purpose and only risked lives needlessly. But they could not prevent determined believers from making the journey. The lessons that Sol Udar offers to modern civilization prove both obvious and frequently ignored by those in power. You understand now that confidence in the permanence of achievement can become dangerous hubris. The dwarves of the Golden Age believed their realm would last forever, that their civilization was too strong to fall to any threat. They ignored warning signs, treated existential dangers as curiosities to be studied rather than threats to be feared. When the crisis came, they were unprepared despite all their strength and accumulated knowledge. Modern societies across Corvair repeat these patterns, building great nations and assuming their power guarantees survival. But Sol Udar stands as proof that no achievement is truly permanent. That vigilance must never waver. That the price of civilization is constant effort against forces that would tear it down. The future of Sol Udar remains uncertain, with proposals ranging from complete abandonment to massive military operations aimed at reclamation. You would have heard arguments for sealing all known entrances and forbidding further expeditions, treating the ruins as a tomb that should remain undisturbed. Others advocate for limited controlled access, allowing scholarly research while restricting treasure hunting. Some suggest using the ruins as a training ground, a controlled environment where warriors and mages can gain experience fighting aberrations without risking civilian populations. The most radical proposals call for deliberately collapsing the entire complex, bringing down the mountain itself to bury the corruption so deep that nothing can ever escape. But each plan faces practical obstacles and political opposition, from clans who view Sol Udar as ancestral heritage that cannot simply be abandoned or destroyed. The horror of Sol Udar lies not just in what it has become, but in what it represents for all of Eberron. You walk through those corrupted halls and see the death of dreams, the transformation of beauty into nightmare, the perversion of everything civilization holds valuable. Every Dalgaunt was a craftsdwarf who took pride in their work. Every Dahlgrim represents families merged together in agony. Every corrupted treasure was an heirloom that embodied generations of accumulated skill and love. The Daelker did not simply destroy Sol Udar. They transformed it into a monument to despair, a demonstration that everything mortals build and love can be twisted into something that serves madness. And that monument stands today beneath the Mror Holds, its corruption spreading slowly but inexorably, year after year, century after century. The story of Sol Udar reminds us that vigilance is the price of survival, that we must never become so confident in our achievements that we ignore warnings when danger approaches. The dwarves who built the realm below were not fools or cowards. They were skilled, intelligent, and powerful. But they failed to recognize the threat until it was too late to stop. Their descendants carry that lesson forward, maintaining watch over the ruins, fighting to contain the corruption, and passing down the story so that future generations will remember what happens when pride blinds us to danger. Sol Udar stands as both treasure trove and warning, drawing the ambitious with promises of ancient power, while demonstrating the ultimate cost of hubris. If you found this deep dive into the tragedy of Sol Udar compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support allows us to continue exploring the darkest corners of dungeon lore, uncovering the stories that shaped the worlds we adventure in. Share this with fellow lore enthusiasts who appreciate understanding not just what monsters are, but why they exist and what their presence means for the settings we love. Thank you for joining me in the depths. Until next time, may your own adventures never lead you to places where reality breaks and madness seeps through the cracks in the world.